We are working on this undercorset belt from Steamtorium. Last week, I was losing my voice, so all we did really was cut out fabric and talk about fabrics and a little bit about sizing. In preparation for today, I did fuse my interfacing to my pieces, and I just used a sort of medium weight fusible interfacing. I did both sides of my fabric because I'm using sort of quilting weight cottons for this. They're just fabrics I had in my stash, but they need to be a little bit more sturdy. So her pattern calls for mid-weight fabrics to sort of like upholstery weight fabrics. And she's definitely using the weight of those fabrics to add in more stability and strength to this garment because you're going to be hanging things off of it. But if you're like me and you don't have a lot of upholstery weight fabrics kicking around in your stash, then you can sort of make it work by fusing everything to give it a little bit more body and stability. The other advantage of doing it this way is that you have something less bulky riding under your corset. Now, this one is for Eve, and so they will be wearing it under their corsets. Because I like put a bunch of clothes over my corsets. Usually they're really buried deep. So a belt like this wouldn't work very well for most of my costumes. But I think they're really cool and fun, and especially for people who like to have their corsets visible, or people like Eve who carry a lot of stuff in their sort of day-to-day experience of being at conventions. And since Glenn and I are partly the reason why Eve has to carry a lot of things on their person at conventions, I thought maybe I should make them a belt and some pouches as a thank you. So anyway, so I'm going to make...
My question is,
yes,
if you use a really pretty fabric, like that Halloween fabric you got, can't you wear it over your corset just
absolutely,
to show the pretty fabric?
Absolutely. And in fact, if you make it to go over your corset, you can decorate it too, right?
Whoa. Pretty.
Like, if I were not making this to go under a corset, I would pipe the seams, to be honest. And I even thought about doing a flat piping because it wouldn't be bulky. But one of the reasons I would pipe the dickens out of this is because the piping will give it more stability along these seams that are holding the weight of your pouches. And so it'll be attractive, but also functional. So I think piping would be really nice if you're not putting it under a corset. I also think that it would be beautiful with a bit of decoration and as something to go on over the top of your corset. The other nice thing about doing this as something to wear over your corset is that it's still going to be shaped so that it doesn't do that weird thing where it sort of like gaps away from your waist like a normal belt would do, because it has this wonderful curve to it. So yeah, I would totally do that, Joanne. It's a great observation, a great question. So just make sure that you are doing your interfacing. Yeah, Martha.
Well, I had a size related question.
Yes.
Because last time you commented that Eve was standard size. And well, not maybe not standard size, but a standard size on the pattern, right?
Yes, standard size on the pattern.
Yeah. So I am larger than the pattern. Would you say that I can just expand it where the different, like where it looks like you can expand it on there, or do you think I should do it also in a different place?
So I have two things about that question, because it is something I thought about in regards to making one for myself or for Temperance or Captain Azar. Like most of us that I know, including myself, fit either between sizes or outside of the size range that's in the pattern. And while the pattern has a pretty broad size range, it's still like that upper limit is not that big. So what I would do is absolutely increase my measurements along each seam, and just make sure that you are continuing that curve to help yourself out. The other thing you can do, though, if you want to be really clever about it and to make it more adjustable, is that rather than sewing these seams together, you finish them and you put grommets and lacing between the seams. You can even do that at center back. So then you have additional adjustability from your lacing. And if you use like elastic cord, even more adjustability. So in fact, I think I mentioned this last time. I'm planning to use grommets and corset laces for eaves. It really only needs one little tie here at the front, but I love a grommet. It helps it be a little adjustable. It means they can swap out the length of lace they want, also the style of lace they want. But also, if your lace breaks because you used a grosgrain ribbon and it wears out or the stitches come out, it's a lot easier to replace a broken lace through a grommet than it is one that is sewn into your garment. So anyway, and I have all the things I need to do grommets. So why not? It's 2 grommets. But you could put like 2 grommets at every seam and just do a little X with your ribbons or your elastic. And then you've got additional like flexibility. So
Okay.
I hope that adds to. Yes, Joanne.
So, because it was raining so hard at the last Renaissance Fair, I didn't bring out my spinning wheel. I mean, who would? Instead, and because I can't sit there without doing something, I had my Lucette, and I make cords, and it just occurred to me, I could make a cord that matched. I could make a 2-color cord that would match because I want to do it over the corset. So that's just another way to decorate it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So in my checkered youth, I too used to make cords on Lucette. I still have my beloved Lucette. So if you've never seen one of these, Joanne has more information about it and is more current, obviously, than I am. But this is a great way to make cord that's decorative and very strong. I used to use just embroidery floss for mine. The one thing
I use
wish...
weaving thread because I have so much of it.
Absolutely. I wish that mine had a handle. That's the one complaint. See, Joanne's has a handle. The handle is really nice.
I'm using this. Oh, here we go. Wait a minute. Does that work?
Yes.
This green and purple.
Ooh.
I really like it was just, let's just try this. You have these 2 things. Let's try it.
Yeah, that's so good. Joanne, will you show us your Lucette as well?
Okay, here's my Lucette. I actually really like this, and I like doing it at fair because I find it relaxing. Yeah. So I have this one. I thought I could use for little kids to show them how to use a Lucette.
That's nice.
It's too big for little kid hands.
Oh, you need one like this.
Yeah, like this. And then this is one that I let kids try because it's a single color. I'm not going to use it for anything. It's just I let them try it on.
Perfect.
It's got a piece of, I think it's mother of pearl right there.
That's nice. Joanne's is nicer. Listen, if you are interested, I recommend getting one with a handle very highly. This was handmade by an artisan that I knew a long time ago. Very talented. I love to have this thing from him, but it is not ergonomic because I found that I had to hold it about like this while I was working, and my hand would cramp while I was doing the knotting to make my cord. I believe you can get some Lucettes at La Cisse, but there are probably some other places online to get them.
Yeah.
It's very easy skill to pick up.
This one did not have a handle on it, and I hated it. So Jake got a dowel from, the hardware store and added it, glued it on. I think he probably drilled a hole for it because I married my own personal cue from James Bond, so he fixed it for me.
I love that. That's great. Thank you, Jake, for doing that thing. Yeah, a handle makes a really big difference with those, honestly. So, Lucette, I don't have instructions anymore, but I'm sure their instructions are online. There might be a workbook through La Cisse. They're really great at having those kinds of resources. Honestly, it's an older art, but it's something that we can really use those chords in our steampunk creations if you want to get into a quick, easy little handworking project. So
I think I got a book from La Cisse on it. And the weird thing is, if you read something and learn it, and then you try to learn from other people and they do it differently, but you can't get over the way you learned it from reading the book.
Absolutely.
So, but the nice thing about the book, it has different ways of doing it. So you get different types of chords.
Right. Because you can get like a wide flat chord, you can get a square chord. And Joanne's good at knotting, so this is like in your bailiwick. But
Yes,
honestly, I'm bad at knotting, and I still did fine with my Lucette back in the day.
Okay, one last thing I want to say, then I promise I'll shut up. When I was a child back in the 50s and the 60s, and whenever we went camping, my mother took a wooden spool of thread, an empty one, because back then they were wooden.
Yes.
And she would put 4 finish nails in the top of it, and then it's basically a Lucette, but it's with 4 instead of 2. And she would do it for my sister and me to keep us busy.
You had one of those, June?
I had a plastic one that was like that with the 4 things, and then you just kept going around and around and around and around.
But kept my sister and me busy and out of her hair, which I think was the goal.
That was the big thing. Honestly, I think there's a sort of elevated version of that that's very popular right now. It's elevated in that like the tools are a bit fancier than homemade with nails totally works, or a plastic version. It's based on this like Japanese knot making stuff that makes these long cords. You can take really
nail binding.
Yeah. Yes. So, you could take really fancy classes to do that now, apparently.
Yeah.
I love that. Anyway, your mom sounds like a marvel. And June, I love that you have one as well. That's so cool. All right. So our little project, very easy. The instructions are really good on this one. Keep in mind that your seam allowances are 3/8 of an inch rather than a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch. So it's right in between those two. You're basically going to start by clipping or pinning or placing your little short seams together for your front piece and your back piece, unless you are doing that thing I suggested to Martha, where you are keeping them separate to like put a little lace moment in there. In that case, you're going to sew each section as a separate thing. Make sure you add your seam allowance to those so that when you finish that edge, you're not losing any of your width, because the key here is you want to keep that width. So we're going to just sew these together, and what I'm going to do is sew everything that needs to be sewed before it needs to be pressed. So when we move over to the pressing table, we do a big session of pressing. And that is, to be honest, how I work in my projects normally. When I'm doing a big sewing situation, I sew as much as possible. Then I go to the work table and press things. Then I come back and do the next sewing steps. Her instructions have you sew a bit, press a bit, come back before you move on to the next section. So keep that in mind, that I'm going a little bit out of order from what she's recommended. But that's okay, because I'm not constructing, I'm just sewing and prepping. So she has you sew your little loops for your D-rings and your swivel hooks as one long piece of fabric that you will then cut into your tabs. So I've got that prepped as well. And I have also used my fusible interfacing on this. It's the same weight of fabric. It's the same black cotton twill. This is a leftover actually from my Star Trek uniform. I think it's from that build. I use a lot of black cotton in my life. And this is just a very plain Jane fusible interfacing. Right. So I'm also going to just use regular old all-purpose threads and a normal needle size. So I'm going to be using a size 12 needle. And I always use the Gutermann thread because my sewing machine likes Gutermann. It likes the way it's wound on the cord. It also likes Mettler. So the German threads are a big hit with my Japanese sewing machine. I don't think they're collaborating. I think it just happens to be the case. So I'm just going to use black thread because my project is black. But on the outside of this garment, when I go to finish it, I may top stitch in like white or gray or silver or something interesting, because if I have to top stitch, why not make it decorative, right? She's not here with us right now, but I know Deborah would ask right now if I'm going to use a top stitch needle for that. No, I will not be using a top stitch needle because I'm not going to use top stitching thread. Now, I have experienced the complicated joys of top stitching threads now. I used some for my rainbow corset to do all of my stitching for the boning channels. And for those in the class, you know that sometimes that made my life much more difficult than it needed to be. So yes, top stitching thread can be lovely, but it's not necessary. You don't have to have it for every project. However, if you're using it, you are going to need to use a top stitching needle. So that is the lesson I learned kind of painfully when we were doing that corset class, because my threads kept breaking and I just needed a different style of needle and to change my tension and all kinds of nonsense.
So what's the difference between a top stitching needle and like a sharp or a universal?
They have a different size of the eye. The eye is wider so that the thread doesn't snag and rub against your metal of your needle. And so it doesn't wear out and snap. And you know what, Martha? That was a question I had. I was like, why do I need this fussy top stitching needle? Come on now. I'm using like the right size needle. But I have now seen and used a top stitching needle, and the eye is wildly larger than your standard needle eye. So it is really a big difference, and it helped a lot. The other thing was that the tension was a constant challenge with that top stitching thread. Part of that was that I had my big cone on a thread stand, And so I had to like adjust it constantly. Not only the tension, but the position of the cone relative to the sewing machine. And if I didn't have everything just so, and if I had not like said the right words to the sewing gods, if I was not holding my tongue just right, my thread was going to break like every time. It was a mess. So worth it. But it absolutely added to my behind the scenes labor, like significantly. So, all right. We're just gonna do a regular old straight stitch, nothing fancy here. All of this project is kind of like very plain Jane sewing. The most complicated bit of it is turning it and doing your top stitching. So that's nice though. Sometimes you want just like a little straightforward project, right? I'm using my straight stitch on my machine. I have it set at a 2.5 millimeter, which is kind of like my standard stitch length. I've added in my size 12 needle here. I have my fabric raw edges matched up. And I guess I lied. The tricky part is remembering that it's a 3/8 inch seam allowance because I'm so unused to that size seam allowance. I am back tacking on every seam. Not a big back tack, just enough to keep my seams from unraveling. Because my cotton has a nice amount of texture to it, I don't really feel a need to pin it or clip it as I'm going in. It kind of holds itself together due to the texture of the fabric. But if you're using something slick, you may want to clip it or pin it. Same if you have like a woodgy fabric. So this is the black side of my fabric or my belt. So now I'm going to do the pattern sides. I can't really call it a right or wrong side because I don't know which side Eve is going to decide they like to have on the outside. So I'm just going to finish everything to make it reversible. Definitely, you can see where I did not have everything perfectly pressed when I cut, which is like not best practice, but when you don't feel well and it's a very simple garment, sometimes you skip some elements. It always looks nicer if you press first, of course, and things are a little bit more even. Okay, so now I have my pattern fabric sewn together. And these seams all need to get pressed flat and open. If you are like, oh, I am in a hurry, I'm doing this as quickly as possible, you can really just go in here and give yourself a good finger press. It's never as nice as going in with your iron and pressing that way, but a finger press will get you through. As you can see, it has flattened out my seam pretty nice. And again, sometimes we're doing something quickly, like we have to go to a convention in 2 hours, and we suddenly realize we need a belt. I don't recommend doing that but we've all been there. So the part I'm dreading the most about this project is that I have to turn this whole loop. Turning things is probably one of the things about sewing that I like the least. So, I always kind of dread it. I feel like I do a bad job. I forget all of the tricks all of the time because I never practice, because I avoid doing it. It's a vicious cycle. This is our long strip that's going to become all of our little tabs to hold all of our hooks. And basically, I've got it folded in half, right sides together. I did a little back tack at the starting end. And again, we're using that 3/8 seam allowance as I go along. At this point, once I have all of these pieces sewn up, it's time to move over to the ironing boards and press those seams open. You can do it. Again, you can just finger press everything. That's totally a viable option. But I find that if I use that iron, I get a little bit of a crisper finish. So I usually take the time. I finish with that back tack. In this case, we're going to be cutting this long strip. So the back tacks are actually just to keep it from unraveling while it's being turned. So it will be nice and stable while I'm turning it. I may cut away a little bit more of that fusible interfacing, but I'm hoping I won't need to. I do like my fusible interfacing to get stitched down a little bit and not go all the way into the seam allowance, but just a little bit of the way into the seam allowance, because this adhesive will eventually wear out no matter where you live. But here in the desert, it will wear out very fast. And so if I catch a bit of it in my stitches, it's like backup that will hold it in place, even when that interfacing adhesive starts to wear out. These are very simple pressing moments. It just needs to be pressed flat. I will say I've got this wonderful wool mat on my table. I was like, I know I mention this somewhat regularly. I was skeptical that wool would make that much of a difference to my pressing, but it does. It's so nice. It's actually worth it if you can get one. So sometimes they have them on sale through Madame Sew or Amazon. All right. I picked up some lint as we were going across the room. So I'm just going to press open my little seams.
Are you sure it wasn't cat hair?
It's gold and sparkly.
So in my house, it's cat hair.
Yes, in your house or June's house, this is cat hair. In my house, I have no gold cats. So it's probably from some silk or something like that. I love working with silk because I'm that kind of girl, but also I just love the drape and the color and everything else. But it does shed. So I'm going to press both sides. If you have a sort of heavyweight fabric, you may want to clap your little seam to like reinforce that flat seam. If you don't have a clapper, you can just put like a book or something heavy on top of it. It's not as effective as the, nice wood that's going to like reflect that heat back into your fabric, but it will kind of do the same thing. Or you can use your like little seam roll or tailor's ham, what have you. Once I've pressed this one, I'm going to do all the other pieces as well. This really is a fairly quick little project. The one thing I did not have on hand were the swivel hooks. I don't make a lot of bags or a lot of purses, so that's not a finding I normally have on hand. But they were very inexpensive through WowWack. They had a nice little selection, and they ship so fast. And no, I mentioned that last time. I always consider a project like this a good excuse to pick up other like necessities that I'm running low on. Go in, let those seams set for a moment. Sometimes, the thing I've learned, sometimes you need to just let your pressing sit for a moment to complete the process. So you don't necessarily have to always let it cool completely, but letting it cool a little bit will allow that pressing to be a bit more firm. Okay, so I've been putting this one off the most. Because I use the interfacing, it's a little stiffer. It's going to be a little bit harder to just do the thing, but you want to kind of roll your seam to the center back. I haven't found them in the United States, but I would really like to find them. There are these silicone forms for doing tubes and stuff like this. They're great for making your boning channels for corsetry. They're available in Europe and they're in metric. So as I turn this to the center, I want to go ahead and like press that back seam. Get it nice and flat. It's fighting me a little bit. And it's probably because I interfaced it, but I stand by my decision because it will be a lot more stable when it's done, and it will hold up better to any weight that Eve hangs from it. So I think she suggests you trim away your seam allowance before you press in the instructions. I tend to trim my seam allowance on something like this after I press because it's so narrow that it will be hard for me to get my iron into position and really press it nice and flat. So I just like to press it while my seam allowance is a little wider to make it easier for me. I am pressing it from both sides, and I'm definitely going to go in and use my seam stick here because this is fighting me a little bit, and I want it to be nice and flat. A good, clean press on that seam. Is it's the interfacing is making it a little bit recalcitrant.
I'm not sure a 3/8 inch seam, I would trim it all, especially because your interfacing is already smaller
Yeah.
than your seam allowance.
Yeah.
So you've got it layered properly.
You do. It's already kind of naturally graded. The one
That's the
reason
word.
I'm probably going to trim it not wildly, but a little bit because it will be easier to turn if there's less seam allowance. But Joanne, you make a really good point. The seam allowance is not that big. I am going to use my little duckbill scissors for trimming, and I'm only trimming off like maybe a 1/16 of an inch. So I'm taking it down to about 1/4 of an inch wide. These little duckbill scissors were a gift from June, and they're very helpful for this sort of thing. You can see that I run the duckbill against the fabric I don't want to cut, and it helps protect that fabric from inadvertent snipping.
Are you sure that I gave you those?
You did. You gave me a little set of
Oh, yes. Yes, you're
yeah,
right. I did. It was a whole set. Yeah, I got
it
it with
was.
free with one of my machines and I already had. Yeah, okay.
It's
I
very
indeed.
nice.
I did indeed do that.
And I use them a lot.
Yeah, I can see because you
Um,
actually sew. Yes. I I think about it a lot.
you have sewn a great deal.
Yes, in the past.
You're just on a hiatus right now.
Yeah, years of it.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean,
okay.
there's been a lot that has gone on in that
Well,
period of time, June.
I want to say though, I'm very inspired at the moment because in my latest collection of embroidery designs from OESD, there's a Tula Pink giant dinosaur,
Oh,
and I think I really need to do that.
you do really need to do that. I agree. So now that I have trimmed this down, mainly, again, to be honest, mainly to hopefully make it slightly easier to turn, my least favorite thing, it's time to try and turn this nonsense. And this is not my strong suit. I definitely, I'm gonna own that. It's not. My
Don't you have a
grandmother's
don't you have a tube turner?
I do have a tube turner, but the tube turner and if this method doesn't work, I'm going to turn to the tube turner. There's a lot of T words in there. For the tube turner, you have to sew one end closed so that it will work. It won't, my version at least will not do it with an entirely open tube.
Well, you can
Um,
always cut that off.
and I mean, June, that may be what we do if the safety pin nonsense is giving me too much guff. But I feel that I need to demonstrate at least that this is an option. So, and maybe you'll be better at it than I am. You're going to take a safety pin and you want to push it through your back seam. I recommend getting like a nice little amount of fabric on it. If you don't have enough, it tends to pop out. And then supposedly, this is the urban legend I've heard, is that you can push your pin through and then you just like pull it through and magically your tube turns. It never works this way for me though. I don't know if I just do it wrong or if I am impatient, but also as I suspected, the interfacing makes this a lot stiffer. So again, interfacing, good idea, but turning is hard. So I may go to the tube turner as I'm not getting it to successfully turn. June, if you're laughing at me, that's completely legit.
I would never
Oh,
laugh
you're
at her.
very kind. I'm laughing at myself. So, but this is the theory. I'm not going to be able to show it to you in practice because I'm failing. The theory is you push your little safety pin all the way through, and then your tube sort of magically turns behind you. In my case, that is not happening. It's
Get
just
out
making a
a
big
chopstick.
traffic jam.
Get
Yeah, a
out a
chopstick
chopstick.
Oh,
A
or a
no,
tube turner.
yeah.
Mm.
That's the way I do mine. You just need to get it started. Like when you first start pushing it through, only push through like a couple inches before you get the fabric to turn.
Okay.
And then once
All
it's
right.
definitely on the inside there, then it will
All right.
magically turn.
Okay. All right, Martha. I'm
Yeah.
believing you because I've seen your costumes and I know you can sew up a storm.
This is
Um,
like, I assumed this was, the way the people were used to do it in the olden times. I did eventually get one of those long sticks with the tiny little crochet hook, but
oh, I really want one of those. I don't have one of those.
yeah, they're good for little turning things.
Yeah.
Okay, did you get it
Okay.
started?
I think so. Okay, so I've got like a little bit in there, Martha. Okay.
Okay.
All
So
right. So
yeah,
I've got a little bit, and now I'm just gonna like proceed.
yeah, like do 5 or 6 inches.
Oh, it is working much better. This is great. Well, you know what? Keeping it real. Listen to Martha's advice, everyone. Do not do what I was doing, which was absolutely rubbish. Hopefully, I can remember this for the next time, Martha, because look, it's going much, much better.
Yeah, I
Um,
also have advice, which is push the head of the pin, um, push it the tail end of the pin is the one you're pushing.
oh,
Because
sort of.
otherwise if it pops open, um, is that right? No, no. Yeah, the front of the pin goes first. Because otherwise when it pops open, it'll slide off. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm doing. I'm like my fingers pushing from the back, but the head is moving forward.
Yeah. So yeah, you can get usually, several inches on there before you have to straighten it out. So
Yes. All right. So the tube turner is a little easier, to be honest, but I'm happy we can show this less tools intensive option. And Martha, thank you for stepping me
oh,
through how
you're
to do
welcome.
it
Yeah, and
without making myself crazy.
I have a lot of those a lot of those safety pins. If you all want one, I'll sell them to you for $10 plus shipping.
Oh my gosh. No, these are my, I'm actually, speaking of safety pins, this is my very fancy pants Japanese safety pins. They're black and they're
Wow, I was
stronger.
joking.
Yeah, they're not worth $10 a pin, but Andy can back me up on this. If you are my friend, if I know your name and you come to me and you're like, I have a safety pin emergency, I'm like, I have got the safety pins. But if you are a stranger that I do not know, I'm like, oh no, I have no safety pins because they are actually kind of expensive as safety pins go. So I only give them to friends. Um,
Well, yeah, I mean, I've learned the hard way that you have to buy safety pins in the notion section at Joann's,
yes,
not in the
yes.
craft section.
No, they're
Craft ones are
terrible.
not strong.
They're not. They're rubbish. So, all right, I've got this turned right side out. I'm going to give it another little press because now it's got all of those bunchy marks from being turned. And again, the interfacing does make it a little bit trickier but it's worth it because the little tube things will be more sturdy and they will hold more weight. And yes, thank you, Captain Azar. These safety pins are from Richard the Thread, and Lois sells them by the gross. So I have had my particular array of these for like 6 years or something, 7 years. They've lasted me a long time, but they are spendy. So now that I have pressed everything, it's time to, yes, Captain Azar is right. Now we hide that box of safety pins, and only she and I know where they are in the booth. So ridiculous. Okay, so now I have pressed this nice and flat. It looks pretty solid. It's time to make some marks for where my little bag loops go, and then I'm going to cut them and position them. So when I'm doing something like this, you guys, I'm a little bit loosey-goosey, not totally, but it's not like tailoring marks. I don't have to have it perfect. I just need to have it approximate. So the wonderful woman behind Steamtorium has her pouch system that she's intending for you to hang off of your belt. But really, you can add as many or as few of these loops as you like. You can set them up to please yourself, depending upon what you want to hang off of your belt. You can hang anything. You can use her pouches and her system, or if you're just like, I'm going to hang mugs and a chatelaine and my pet's leash off of this, you could do that. I don't know if I would do the leash of a racing greyhound hung off of this belt. I don't think it's that strong, but if you have a very like mellow dachshund, you're probably fine. So when I'm doing something like this, where I don't have to have my tailoring marks be super pristine, super precise. They just need to be in the general zone of where they need to go. I usually just lie my pattern piece on my fabric and I pin mark. So I did take care to make sure I had my little marks on my pattern piece. I'm just going to, I have it lined up with the end. I'm just going to pull it back enough that I can connect with my fabric. I'm just going to put a little pin right where that mark would go. Okay. I love these little magic head pins. They really are easier to manipulate, especially when my fingers are tired. She just has 3 little marks per side. So I believe her vibe is that you're going to have like one double hanger pouch and like one small thing hanging off of a side. But again, this is for you, and you know what you want and need off of your belt. So take that into consideration as you're positioning your little tabs. This is definitely why having this kind of transparent paper is helpful, because I can see my marks on both sides of my pattern piece. Makes my life a little easier. You can also go in with a seam gauge and measure everything and position it that way. Totally viable. All right, so now that I've got these all marked and ready, it's time to cut my little straps. and get those ready to pin in place. So each strap piece, you're supposed to cut it 2 inches long, approximately. You do want to get it sort of even so that all of your straps are roughly the same length. I have OCD, so I like my things to be hanging fairly evenly, and that happens better if my straps are fairly uniform. But if you're off by like an 18th or a 16th or something like that, most people are never going to notice. And the people who do are like me and they have OCD and they're aware that they have it and it's not a big deal. I definitely made mine extra long because I just had an extra long piece of scrap fabric in the right dimensions. And I felt like if I wanted to add an extra loop or two, that was between me and Eve. And I could definitely add extra if I want. So now we need our little D-rings and our little swivel hooks. So let me go fetch those as I forgot them. There are a lot of ways to approach this, but her method is just to take your little swivel hook, make sure that the seam is on the inside, and just like slip it in, fold it in half, and pin in place. So I'm going to do like a little pin to hold things while I'm working. You're supposed to have 6 swivel hooks for this project. Did I order 6 swivel hooks? No, I mismeasured, I miscounted, and I ordered 4. So I'm going to do a couple of D-rings. And when I make things for Eve to hang off of this, I will add the swivel hooks to the things that need to hang off of the D-rings. Also, that means that Eve can customize what they want to hang from what. So that is the story I'm telling myself. These little swivel hooks are great, though. They come in sets of 2 from Wawac. They were very inexpensive, but they have a nice weight to them. And they came in a few different little colors. So like a bright gold tone, kind of like a brass, a nice nickel plated situation, and this antique gold that I tend to preference when I'm doing steampunk things. I also got matching D-rings at the time. I probably meant to get another bag of swivel hooks, but clicked the D-rings instead is what happened. So it happens. But they're nice. I got slightly wider ones than she asked for in her pattern. And that's fine. And since I cut out more loops than I needed, I'm going to do an extra one just for Eve. So instead of 6, she's going to get 7. That's what happens when you're a cryptid. You get an extra one. So these are all pinned together. The little loops are through my metal bit, and now it's time to position them on the belt. Easy peasy. So I'm going to center my little loop right over that mark, and I'm going to line up my raw edges together. Once I'm happy with that, I'm just going to pin it. I'm pinning with the pinpoint towards my metal bits because I am fairly certain I'm going to be sewing it in such a direction that that will make the most sense. So I've done two of my little swivel hooks together. I'm going to do a little D-ring situation here. And then I'm going to find my center back. I'm going to mark that basically by finger pressing a little seam into it, a little crease. And now I'm going to line up a D-ring right over that center back. I'm going to repeat. I'm going to put my little swivel hooks and a D-ring over here. Actually, I'm gonna, yeah. It helps that I have made the pouches before, so I have a sense of what the dimensions are. Eve doesn't know I'm making this, although if they watch the video later, they may find out. But I'll probably make them a regular pouch, a fan holster, and probably a teacup holster. Okay, so now that I have these all pinned in place, the next step is to just go baste all of these little tabs, and then we're going to sew our right sides together, and then we're going to turn it. And at that point, we'll be just about finished. So those are our next steps. So the big tricky part about doing this part, as it were, is that you have to watch out, make sure that you are not hitting the metal bits as you're sewing. If you're like, oh, I'm kind of nervous about that, you can always pull out your zipper foot or your invisible zipper foot that I personally use as my piping foot all the time, because that way you're definitely not going to run up against that metal part. But we're going to see if we need to swap feet or if the seam allowance is enough that I can baste it into position and it'll be fine. Okay. Hi, Cake. You're ridiculous. All right. I think it's going to be fine. The seam allowance is again 3/8 of an inch. So for basting, she recommends doing 1/4 of an inch, which is just inside that 3/8 of an inch. Hi, Cake. You've had treats. If you have more treats, it will be a mess for all of us. He disagrees with me. Okay. Mm. So I'm just going to line this up with my 1/4 inch mark on my plate here. I'm going to use a slightly bigger stitch length because this is the basting stitch. I'm not going to worry about doing back tacks. I'm just putting this in so I can basically not worry about these moving around when I go in to sew the whole thing together. I do try and pull my pins out while I'm working rather than sew over them. I am just going to sew straight along here rather than picking my needle up and snipping the thread every time I move. These are pretty thick. You may need to size up on your needle. I put a size 12 in to begin with, and it's handling this pretty fine. That said, I am using basically cotton, quilting weight cotton that has been interfaced with a sort of medium weight interfacing. So it's not very hefty or very thick. The other advantage of sewing all the way along like this is it sort of acts as stay stitching. I'm not that worried about this stretching in the long run because it's a small garment, but having a reinforcement along that edge is not it's not a bad idea. Okay. So now that I have these all stitched in place, I'm going to line up my printed fabric. I'm going to make sure that my seams line up. That should keep everything pretty nicely organized. We are going to stitch around the bottom and part way around the top. You will need to watch your metal bits and shove them out of the way as you're sewing because they have a potential for falling into the seam allowance, which will definitely break your needle. Okay. I usually just visually line up my seams. I'm not doing anything too fussy, but it's pretty obvious in this kind of a project. And I'm not going to do a lot of pinning, but I am going to pin at the seams.
I have a strategy question.
Yes.
Whenever I sew D-rings on things, they flip around.
Yes.
Do you have a secret method so they won't do that?
So I think what I'm going to do after I have this whole thing constructed is actually go in with my piping foot and sew very close to the metal, sort of like I do with putting in a busk or finishing other metal findings on a corset to kind of make it so they can't move that much in this little strap. That's like a little bit fussier sewing, and so I understand why she doesn't suggest it in the pattern, because you do have to have good control of your machine and have something like an invisible zipper foot to get super close to that metal. But if you make it tight, it can't flip around on you as much. It can move a little bit, but it will have a harder time. The other thing about making it tight is because it's not able to move as much, it can't wear the fabric as much. So it actually will give you a little bit more longevity on your loops. That's a great question, though. Thank you for asking.
You're welcome. Thank you for answering.
You are welcome. I hope that's a helpful answer. So Now I'm just gonna put a few strategic clips. We're just going to sew around the outer edge and leave a pretty big opening here in center back on the top edge so that it'll be easier to turn it. And then what we'll do is press those edges under, line it up, and then top stitch it closed. You could slip stitch it and do like an invisible finish on this, but I'm planning to top stitch the whole thing. So I'm not going to do that handwork on this. Okay. So a thing I'm noticing as I'm like manipulating this, preparing to stitch it, is that my little hooks want to pop through. So I am going to just clip over the hook attachments to sort of hold them in place while I'm sewing. See how it's like popped through. Obviously you can manually adjust that as you're going, but sometimes it's nice to not have to worry or think about things as you're sewing. Ideally, everything lines up really nice and is very slick. If it doesn't quite line up, though, just fudge it a bit. This, again, we're not doing a tailored suit. We're not making a corset. It is okay to shift things a bit to just make it work.
That's why I like 5/8 inch seams, 1/2 inch and 5/8 inch. It's easier to fudge it. I hate 1/4 inch seams.
Oh, ooh, oh, they are so rough. I absolutely agree with you on that front. I understand kind of why they are used in things like quilting, but every time I do a quilting project, I'm like, we could just do a 1/2 inch seam. It'd be nice.
I got my embroidery machine from a store in Fresno that does embroidery and quilting. And I take classes on my embroidery machine. But because they're also a quilting store, they keep trying to show me quilting on my embroidery machine. I was just going, not another 1/4 inch seam.
Oh my gosh, right? Oh, absolutely. I frankly will often change the math and do 1/2 inch seam allowances and just trim if I need to. Because I find the 1/2 inch easier to work with. If I am going to consistently do 1/4 inch seams, I sometimes swap to my grandmother's featherweight because honestly, it is easier. I understand why the quilters love that machine because the foot is like a 1/4 inch wide on one side. So it makes your life a little bit easier. All right. So the big trick on this is, frankly, just keeping the metal bits out of the way as you are sewing. And remembering this 3/8 seam allowance that Joanne and I are lamenting. All right. Okay. So she has like a mark for where you can do this, but I'm just going by vibes. I am a few inches in from my little seam, and I'm just going to drop my needle. I'm at the 3/8 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to give myself a nice little back tack here. As I'm going around, I'm going to just sort of shove things out of the way with my fingers and hopefully not get in the way of my stitches. I'm probably having an extra challenge because I'm using a slightly longer, slightly wider metal findings. So we're coming up to this curve. One of the things I consistently get from people who are new to sewing, not sewing. I have no advice on that front. But for folks new to sewing, they're always worried about getting their straight seams really straight. And the thing I usually tell folks who are starting out on their sewing journey is that the straight seams kind of take care of themselves, and they only ever have to be straight enough anyway. But the curved seams are the tricky ones. So I tend to go a little bit slow through that portion, and I'm definitely using my left hand to help me maneuver the fabric through the curve. Slow and steady gets you through. Again, just making sure my metal bits are out of the way of my sewing. Okay. I do think that using a invisible zipper foot might make it easier to do this portion if you have one. Because then you really will not be so worried about running into the metal. It's most noticeable as I'm coming up to this second hook. My presser foot is right next to the metal, so it's a little snug. Coming in from my opening to sort of shift my metal bits out of the way. When I make another one of these, I'm going to use that invisible zipper foot. I'm making it work with my normal presser foot, but I think it'll just be a little bit easier to navigate. Okay. All right. This is a good opportunity to do some clipping around the curves. It'll make your life just a little bit easier when you're turning. I'm not pre-pressing the seams. Probably be a little nicer if I did. Kind of depends on how it turns and how the fabric is manipulating for me. But I'm snipping all the way around the curve. I think my first curve turned out better than my second one, to be honest, but also that's okay. When you go in and snip, I just use the point of my shears, and I'm making sure not to snip all the way through my stitches. Now this part I think is going to be the hardest bit to turn because we've got these metal things in there, and it's like not super bulky, but it's a little bulky. You can use your metal bits to help you pull it through. Hopefully. Mine is hung up on something. Ah, there we go. Okay. The D-rings are easier to turn. The swivel hooks are a little bit longer and they catch on things. So prepare yourselves. Once I get this pretty far, I am going to want to get a chopstick or a needle, or not a needle, ball pointed bodkin or something that does not have a sharp end, because I'm going to want to push out my ends a little bit. You can see how this is sort of coming together before I press it. I do tend to keep a chopstick just on hand in my workshop because it's a very handy little tool. They're pretty readily available, and they are perfect for doing this little job. But this is just by hand so far, and it's looking nice. This is getting a little hefty at this point because it has a lot of metal hanging off of it. I'm really happy I interfaced everything. To be honest, I feel super good about that decision. I thought I would, but it's good to have that extra reinforcement. Okay. And Mr. Cake is here supervising. I know. Oop. Good boy. Yes, you're a good boy. Okay. He's going to be very sad that I'm moving. He was looking for some scritches. Yes, they know who rules the house. It's true, Martha. Our cats absolutely know. She has nice instructions on turning your belts and nice tips on doing that. In general, I'm finding the instructions that are with the Steamtorium pattern are very solid. Outside of doing things a little bit out of order, I'm basically doing everything she recommended. I haven't done too many things off book, in other words. Hello, Kitty. Oh my gosh, the kitties have opinions. So you do want to go in and kind of push out your seams a little bit. This does need a good pressing before it gets top stitched for sure. And I do think that going in, taking your invisible zipper foot and stitching a row of stitches nice and close to the top of your ring will help hold it in position and make it a little bit more stable. That is a bonus fussy bit of sewing that you can do. So let me grab my chopstick. Also works really well. I'm going to use the tip of my needle to not only press out the ends, but also to go in and push along the seam to help push that out. So that when I go in and press, everything will be more where I want it to be. Oh, Joanne, I'm so glad you could be with us. I'm sorry you had a bad day, but I'm delighted you could be here to finish your day. Please give Jake my best. No tutorial next week, but we'll be back after that. And looks like, I mean, unless the rest of the Patreon is like anything except for a bustle cage, we'll be doing that bustle cage in May. The next month it starts with M, in May. So I will see you online. Please take care of yourself, Joanne, and give those kitties a squeeze. Okay, so now that I've got this sort of pushed out, it's ready for some pressing. Looks pretty nice. A little manipulation at the ironing board will get my seams lined up where I want them to be. I will press this before I go in and do any other stitching. And I am going to press under my top seam allowance and then clip that in position so that when I go to top stitch it, it will be nice and smooth. I'm not going to do that tonight because we're getting late. And it's very late if you are east of here. So we will finish this up, or I will do a little video finish of it. But it is a pretty quick project. So I will schedule a time to finish that with you all. Who knows? Maybe we'll do it Wednesday next week instead of Tuesday. But it's almost done. It's super cute. In the future, we'll probably do some of the pouches as little stash busters to like just do a fun social build together. I highly recommend this pattern and everything else by Steamtorium, really. They make lovely things. Their patterns are great and they're really lovely people. So, overall, 2 thumbs up for Steamtorium. They're available on Etsy. If you go to any conventions on the West Coast, like Clockwork Alchemy, they're usually there. They're usually at Costume College. I don't know if they make it to Port Townsend, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did. They used to pretty routinely go to Gaslight Expo. They don't make it out of the West Coast typically, so if you haven't seen them elsewhere, that's why, but they have a wonderful Etsy shop. So anyway, my darlings, please take very good care of yourselves. Drink lots of tea, stay hydrated, wash your hands, rest and recover from your conventions, or if you're getting ready to go to a convention, take good care of yourselves in advance. And I will see you on Friday for our Friday tea. And then Sunday, we have our Sunday book club. I'm very excited. This month's book is Care and Memory by Elizabeth Bear. It's one of my favorite steampunk books, and Elizabeth Bear is joining us for the book club. I'm really excited to sit down and chat with her about writing and her book. And again, this is one of my favorite books. I'm really excited to share it with all of you and to talk about the gadgets because they're great. All right, I'll see you later. Get some rest.